earlier, there will be patches that get much hotter, but also patches that get much cooler. It's the global average that we talk about. So we've already tipped several irrevocable, non-linear, positive feedback loops in the climate system, such as the melting of permafrost, methane hydrates, and Arctic sea ice, that make an average global temperature increase of only 2 degrees Celsius by 2100 seem like a fairy tale today. When the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with its first assessment in 1991 or 1993, the prediction was for something like a 1 or 2 degree increase. Every time more science is done on this issue, the science is seen to have been ultra-conservative, erring on the side of being cautious and non-alarmist. But in fact, every time the science is done, the picture is even more scary than it was before. With temperatures now expected, what was the range I showed you, 4 to 6, or some of the estimates, depending on the scenario that you're modeling, could be way above it. This is not a picture. You may have done experiments when you were in chemistry class in school, where you put frogs into a petri dish, into a beaker, and you started heating the beaker, the water started warming up. Well, what did the frog do? It seemed to be quite content, and might, after a moment, when it gets to a certain tipping point, the frog would try to jump out of the beaker, but in fact it was too late at that point. It just had to die at that point. So the challenges then are to influence... What's this? What happened?
Poor frog.
Well, look at ourselves. We're going to be these frogs in the system.
Ourselves.
We're the frogs in the system. Well, we are a bunch of idiots, really. Look at how we vote. Look at the kind of people they've just put in power in the United States. Look at George W. Bush. He threw scientists out of the room. This is George W. Bush. That's before Obama. Before Obama. And well, I'll give you a nice quote from Obama recently. But these are very serious issues. We really do need to look at ourselves. And how do we get to look at ourselves? As individuals, we've got to look at what we expect from our organizations, our institutions. We really have to change the whole paradigm by which we live if we're going to try to see a future for young people and future generations. So some of the opportunities and hope that I believe exist, and I think it's worth mentioning that. I just have 2 minutes to go through these. And if I don't have time, I promise we want to leave time for Q&A. So I just want to mention a few of them. There's a document called the Earth Charter. Has anybody read this document? Okay, very few. If you just Google the Earth Charter, you'll find it in about 80 languages around the world. It's a grassroots initiative that the renegade Rockefeller out of New York is the one son that didn't go into daddy's business and create all the havoc and denial in the world and support Exxon in all of its denial. He became a theologian, and he funded the development of a grassroots initiative globally. That's what the Earth Charter is. It's a set of values and principles that if we would buy into them ourselves and insist that our universities in their buying frameworks and our municipalities and our governments would subscribe to these principles, it could well lead us to a path, a sustainable path. South Africa was among the first in 1994 with its Bill of Rights to enshrine environmental protections. We teach about sustainability more and more. I've been in this field now since about 1994, 22 years. It's becoming tiresome to keep repeating the message to people, but it's so important because younger people are where we have to look to for hope, to try to correct all the harms that have been caused. So the Earth Charter talks about respect and care for the community of life, talks about the integrity of ecological systems, that is their ability to sustain themselves, to provide, to be thriving entities, to sustain life at the cellular level, social and economic justice, democracy, non-violence, and peace. I urge you to read this document. South Africa's Bill of Rights enshrines an environment that is not harmful to health and well-being, concern about future generations. Now about there are dozens of countries today that have tried to enshrine the same kind of thing, but of course you won't see it in Canada, you won't see it in the United States. Very few European countries have this kind of language. South Africa essentially, with this Bill of Rights, leapfrogged over the entire planet, all countries. A South African considered ethics and justice issues by the name of Radiki Perrin, and in a chapter in a book called Ethics and Climate Change, a study of national commitments. There's a lovely chapter there that you can read. Again, the link is at the bottom of the slide if you want to look at it. So they're wonderful. The hope is that there are wonderful people looking at this issue very seriously. Donald Brown in Pennsylvania in the USA is perhaps the world's foremost blogger on the topic of climate change ethics, and he's written several books on the topic. Well worth looking at it. He's got a chapter in a book that I produced in 2008 called, I can't even remember the title of the book right now. Ask me if you want to know. But his book, he's got a chapter in the book called Think Tanks, Ideological Think Tanks and the Harm They Do. It's essentially a wonderful analysis of what you've shown us today. Trump's selection of Tillerson as Secretary of State has received considerable, understandable attention from the media in the States because of concern about Exxon's ties to Russia, including, for instance, a contract with Russia negotiated by Tillerson in the amount of $500 billion that can't be executed until economic sanctions placed on Russia for its invasion of the Ukraine are lifted. So you can see it's like a massive cabal that we've got to rise up against. Planetary Health Weekly is a wonderful newsletter that comes out of Ryerson University in Toronto. Quote of the week here is from a quote from Obama. "Take the challenge of climate change," Obama said. "In just 8 years, we've halved our dependence on foreign oil, doubled our renewable energy, and led the world to an agreement that has the promise to save this planet. But without bolder action, our children won't have time to debate the existence of climate change. They'll be busy dealing with its effects, environmental disasters, economic disruptions, and waves of climate refugees seeking sanctuary. Now we can and should argue about the best approach to the problem," Obama continued. "But to simply deny the problem not only betrays future generations, it betrays the essential spirit of innovation and practical problem solving that guided the founding fathers of the USA." Michael Marmot Sir Michael Marmot is the name that I was trying to remember earlier. He talks about social inequalities. Your Professor Solly Bennett is giving a talk tomorrow afternoon that will deconstruct what Michael Marmot was saying here a few weeks ago. He'll be giving this talk tomorrow afternoon at Grudeskur. But essentially, Michael Marmot maintains that the social determinants of health are all important. He fails completely and utterly to recognize that you have nothing unless you have an ecosystem that will sustain that which is the environment to support life. The Canadian, I was part of this group, the Canadian Public Health Association in May produced a discussion paper, you can read this, on including the ecological determinants as part of the social determinants of health. Harvard University addresses this issue. There's a group called Future Earth that looks at these issues. I think they have a major center right here in Cape Town. That. Thank you. Done. 1 minute. Less than a minute. Chris Hedges, if you don't know Chris Hedges, I encourage you to read him. This is a blog, so it's a 2-page short synopsis of his views, but this just came out a few days ago. He's up there with Noam Chomsky and William Bloom in the United States, probably among the top 3 intellectuals in the United States, out of nearly 400 million people. Talks about the dance of death and where we're going with all of this. And fascinatingly enough, just yesterday, through a newsletter by Tikkun, spiritual progressives, dismantling the Environmental Protection Agency so that the rest of God's sacred creation is imperiled by human narcissism. He refers to the Pope's encyclical, Pope Francis, and basically is pointing out that we humans are not here to destroy it, but to support creation for the good of all beings. So he basically attacks Paul Ryan, who's the Speaker of the House in the United States right now, as I understand it, and he's attacking him for he claims to be Christian and Catholic, but in fact he's the opposite, according to this analysis. So my final slide. We work with data. You've seen a lot of data. We take data and we turn it into information. From that information, we hope to generate knowledge. We use that knowledge to inform policy, and hopefully the policymakers will use wisdom in helping to guide us into the future. Thanks very much.
Okay, so I want to thank both Karim and Colin for really stimulating presentations. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I know it's 2 o'clock and those who have to leave can go, but those who have questions, we can take about 5 or 10 minutes.
Thanks very much to both speakers, that was great. I just have for the first speaker, you had a slide up where you pulled out some of the myths, and one of them was around the research grants, the myth that climate scientists only say climate change is happening because of decay. But in your denying or unpacking that, I was waiting for the slide which showed the amount of money that goes to climate denialism, but you didn't come up with that. So I just wondered.
You mean the actual sum?
Yeah, or because you showed a little bit of that, but you have some numbers on that.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Well, I just want to break it down in the slide that I
I
gave.
wonder if we can just take a few questions,
Okay.
otherwise
It's billions versus pennies.
Any other comments or questions about that field? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the same direction. You said that donors trust you. You cannot trace the money which
The
goes
source of
into
money,
the trust.
yeah.
So why is that? Is that
Because that's how it was set up. It was set up to
legally
be
possible
that
to
they're anonymous gifts given by parties that we don't know anything about. And it was done for an obvious reason. Because if ExxonMobil or some of the other fossil fuel companies are actually applying their money through them, there's no way for us to know about it.
And that's
Of an individual who wants to give a lot of...
That's legally.
It's possible to do
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
yes. It's legal.
It's like having a numbered company.
Yeah.
So Karim, I don't know if you want to respond to the first question. So the amount of money we don't
Well,
know.
all I can say is it's billions, if not trillions of dollars it's spent on denial, and against us as academics who do this vigilance work off the corners of our desk with no support, virtually no support.
But it's good to quantify.
Yeah, I think you can
Yeah,
get,
numbers.
I think in that number, that one slide, I do have some numbers, total
Yeah.
numbers in terms of
And-
billions of dollars.
And
But
John Brown's blog will give you those numbers as well. Are you numb from the onslaught?
So I have one question. It's not really. How many people do you say could live on Earth with 4 to 6 degree warming? Just what were those numbers again?
Well, according to the Lovelock's book, the Gaia principle and the final word or whatever it's called, about 8 years ago he came up with this book. He said that it would just literally be 100,000 or something. It's the number I'm remembering from. So it's a huge reduction.
But one way of looking at the number is that the Paris conference we recently had a target of 2 degrees, no more, before things become uninhabitable. And many changes will happen. So 4 to 6 is way out of range of anything we should possibly even think of. If we want to do that for our children and grandchildren, it will be a horrible world to live in. There will be so many natural disasters, if nothing else, the extinction of so many species will happen. So we have to keep it down to 1.5 to 2 is where we should go. The question is, can you have a world in 2050 of 9 billion people? We were talking about now, can we have an ecological footprint that would have no... We are already 1.5 planet in terms of our ecological footprint. We should be a 1 by now, but we're 1.5 already. So, as you pointed out, our population increase and our consumption rate is so high that we're already unsustainable.
I think there's one last
Yeah. Professor Skolny said he was quite reassuring twice during the talk. He said at one point talked about cellular level health, and at another that you need an ecosystem to support all this equity in health. But I was wondering whether that is a generally sort of held concept amongst health practitioners at whatever micro, meso, or macro level you'd like to think. Do they also think as holistically as that and giving due cognizance to other cells that aren't human?
Correct. From a public health point of view, the principle is protect the most vulnerable. If you focus on life at the cellular level and you protect life at the cellular level, then all life can flourish. if you pollute and kill and maim and so on, all forms of genetically modified forms of life at that level, then you potentially are affecting higher up the food chain life. So that's where that philosophy or the principle comes from.
One way of looking at it is to think about a human body to be an ecosystem itself. We have about 10 times more bacterial cells in our body than our own cells. If you don't have a healthy biome in our body, from our intestines all the way to underneath the skin and everything, we will not be alive. Now then put the picture into a larger context and you see that we're living in a web of life. There are many supporting species. If major species die off, we die along with it.
And in fact, to finish your, I didn't say, it's the ecologists who really are the ones that bring our focus to that very issue. Realize that we're part of this web of life.
I think that point is very important, and it's actually because it's a challenge to the public health community. It's not often easily articulated, and the Public Health Association has a special interest group in climate and energy, which is trying to adopt a more holistic view. But you've raised a point about that. That's one of the challenges. So I know there's another speaker, but I actually have to leave because I have to go give a talk in Durban. Also, I want to thank the speakers. I just apologize that I need to rush off. And Andrew Rosser, my colleague, will take over chairing, so that you can decide how long you want to go.
So just while they're transitioning, I just want to say, for young people in the audience, don't see this as a hopeless thing. That's why I find I give all this doom and gloom stuff at the beginning, and then I talk about all this hope. It really, I think, is a key opportunity to know where the goalposts are, to know who the enemy is now, and to train yourselves to be able to work towards making the changes that are needed, is my hope for the younger generation. Easier for me to say than for you to do, but if you need any help, don't hesitate to email me, and I will certainly connect you with where I can and network you.
We have a question at the back.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, it is sometimes appear that CO2 emissions and particular problems of climate change are almost parallel to human population growth. And what I wanted to ask about that is, what is public health's ideology or particular standpoint on what to do with human population?
That is a real elephant in the room kind of question. It's a very important question, absolutely. And I have colleagues who, there are blogs and there are websites and there are institutions that focus on the question you've raised. And public health's view is that it's not quantity but quality, that we have to allow everyone the opportunity to live the longest possible life they can. I'm not talking about heart transplants, I'm sorry, Prudiscure for Crispana and all that, but people to live healthy lifespans, but that with that knowledge and with that security that we don't have the disparities and people don't have to have multiple children to ensure as parents a pension plan or support as they get older. If everyone felt secure, they would hopefully be able to tie a knot in it and stop having all these children, to put it simply from a public health point of view. So our job in public health is to try to address that tension between the drive to have more kids and the drive to have people have equal opportunity to sustain themselves without all those children and a higher quality of life.
Were there other questions? See any more further questions? So I think a lot of discussion has been stimulated, and one of the things is we have these opportunities of having fantastic speakers who stimulate discussions, and then we kind of scatter off and we go back into our silos and our niches. So I really encourage you to follow up on some of the suggestions and the blogs or the information, but also I noticed the ACDI was tweeting. So you could look at some of the tweets and continue the discussion. And really it's up to all of us to continue the debate and the discussion and to include, many of us are academics, included in our research and included as well as in our teaching, and stimulate our students as well. So I'd like to thank both our speakers for taking their time and coming all the way to Cape Town to share your knowledge.
It's not a hardship.
Beating the snow.
Thank you very much.